The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched for miles in every direction. Thousands of beings from across the galaxy sat in their assigned sections, each species marked by different colors and symbols. The air hummed with translation devices, working overtime, turning roars, clicks, and whistles into understandable words. Ambassador Hyun-woo adjusted his simple black suit and looked around the massive chamber. He had been sitting in the same seat for 15 years now, watching the same arguments play out again and again. The Velkari, tall reptilian beings with golden scales, always demanded more military funding. The Nethys, floating creatures of pure energy contained in crystal suits, pushed for greater technology sharing. The Gorvani, bear-like mammals with silver fur, focused on trade agreements that favored their merchant fleets. And humanity? They listened. They took notes. They offered suggestions that were politely ignored. Today felt different, though Hyun-woo could not say why. Perhaps it was the way Admiral Korath's yellow eyes gleamed when he spoke about inferior species. Perhaps it was how the other ambassadors had stopped even pretending to listen when humans spoke. Or maybe it was simply that after 15 years, Hyun-woo had finally had enough. The outer rim territories require stronger defenses, Admiral Korath was saying, his forked tongue flicking out as he spoke. The Velkari military stands ready to provide protection, but we cannot waste resources defending worlds that contribute nothing to galactic security. Murmurs of agreement echoed through the chamber. The Nethys delegate, a shimmering blue form named Valdris, pulsed brighter as she spoke. Indeed. Some species lack the technological advancement necessary for meaningful participation in galactic defense. Perhaps it is time to adjust voting rights accordingly. Hyun-woo felt something cold settle in his stomach. He knew where this was heading. He had seen it building for years as humanity's contributions were dismissed, their innovations credited to others, their diplomatic solutions forgotten the moment they proved successful. I propose, Admiral Korath continued, his voice carrying, clearly across the vast chamber, that species below a certain threshold of military and technological capability have their council votes reduced proportionally. It is only logical that those who contribute more should have greater say in galactic affairs. The chamber erupted in discussion. Some species cheered, others protested, but Hyun-woo noticed that most of the protests came from smaller civilizations, like humanity. The major powers were nodding their heads in agreement. Ambassador Lee from the human delegation leaned over to whisper, "They are talking about us, are they not?" Hyun-woo nodded slowly. "Among others, yes." "What should we do?" Hyun-woo stood up. The simple motion was so quiet, so unremarkable, that few beings noticed at first. He straightened his tie, gathered his papers, and gave a small bow toward the center of the chamber where the council leaders sat. "Ambassador Hyun-woo," called the Gorvani moderator, "do you wish to respond to the proposal?" "No," Hyun-woo said simply. His voice was calm, polite, exactly as it had been for 15 years. "I believe the Council has made its position quite clear. Humanity thanks the Galactic Council for the opportunity to participate in these discussions. We wish you well in your future endeavors." He turned and walked toward the exit. Ambassador Lee and the other human delegates exchanged confused glances before hurrying to follow. Their footsteps echoed softly in the sudden silence that had fallen over the chamber. "That is it?" Admiral Korath called out, his voice tinged with amusement. "No protests? No demands for respect? How very human." Hyun-woo paused at the massive doors leading out of the chamber. For a moment, it seemed like he might turn around and say something. Instead, he simply continued walking. Behind him, the chamber slowly returned to its normal noise level. The Velkari, Nethys, and Gorvani representatives continued their discussions about voting rights and defense spending. Within an hour, most had forgotten that the humans had even been there, but word traveled fast through diplomatic channels. On research station Kepler-7, Dr. Minna received the message 3 days later. She was working late in her laboratory, running calculations on quantum entanglement patterns that could revolutionize galactic communications. Her Nethys colleagues had been taking credit for her theoretical breakthroughs for years, always finding ways to minimize her contributions in the official reports. Minna read the message twice, then quietly began copying her research files to a personal drive. She would finish her current project, of course. It would be unprofessional to leave her work incomplete. But after that, on the construction platform orbiting Titan Base, engineer Tejo was solving another impossible problem. The Gorvani supervisors had declared that the station's rotating sections could not be balanced properly. The mathematics were too complex, they said, the gravitational forces too unpredictable. Tejo had spent 3 weeks developing an elegant solution using human engineering principles that other species found too simple to be effective. When his solution worked perfectly, his supervisor would take credit, as always. When Tejo received the message from Earth, he simply smiled and began packing his tools. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. Human diplomats like So Young, closed embassies with formal notices and polite goodbyes. Human scientists like Dr. Ki Young submitted their resignations from joint research projects. Human traders like Dong Min terminated their contracts with alien corporations. None of them made speeches. None of them demanded explanations or apologies. They simply left. The galaxy barely noticed. Finally, Admiral Korath said when he heard about the human withdrawals, "Now we can focus on species that actually matter." Dr. Valdris of the Nethys was equally dismissive. Human scientific methods were always too primitive anyway. We will advance much faster without their constant questions and simple-minded approaches. Gorvani Trade Minister laughed when told that human logistics coordinators were leaving. Good. Now we can implement proper efficiency protocols without having to explain everything to species that barely understand basic economics. As the months passed, human ships quietly disappeared from trade routes and patrol corridors. Human settlements in mixed colonies began relocating to purely human worlds. The great human embassy complexes were shuttered and abandoned. And still, the galaxy did not realize what it was losing. In the Galactic Council, the vote to reduce humanity's representation passed easily. After all, the humans were not even there to object. The Velkari military expanded its influence over Outer Rim defenses. The Nethys took control of several research stations. The Gorvani absorbed human trade routes into their merchant empire. Everything seemed to be proceeding exactly as the major powers had planned. In the outer rim of the galaxy, far beyond the reach of Council sensors, human ships gathered at coordinates that had been secretly shared through diplomatic channels. They came from every corner of known space, carrying refugees, researchers, engineers, and diplomats who had served the galaxy faithfully for centuries. Captain Nara stood on the bridge of the lead ship, watching as the last of the human vessels arrived at the rendezvous point. Behind her, Navigation Officer Jun Seo was calculating jump coordinates to a system that did not appear on any galactic star charts. "All ships report ready for departure," Jun Seo said quietly. Nara nodded. "Signal the fleet. Take us home." The human ships vanished into hyperspace, leaving behind empty space and a galaxy that had no idea what it had just lost. 6 months had passed since the humans left, and Commander Zephion was staring at another red warning light on his control panel. The automated defense grid protecting the Velkari outer colonies was failing again, and he had no idea why. The massive war room around him buzzed with activity as technicians ran diagnostics and engineers shouted orders. Banks of computers lined the walls, each one monitoring a different part of the defense network that stretched across 17 star systems. Red lights blinked like angry eyes throughout the room. "Status report," Zephion barked at his chief. Technician, a young Velkari named Korex, who had graduated at the top of his class from the military academy. "Defense Platform 7 Alpha has gone offline, sir," Korex reported, his golden scales dulled with stress. That makes 12 platforms this month. The quantum entanglement network is experiencing cascade failures, but we cannot identify the source, Zephion hissed in frustration. When the humans had first installed this defense system 30 years ago, it had been considered a marvel of engineering. The platforms were connected through quantum entanglement, allowing instant communication and coordination across vast distances. Enemy fleets could not approach any Velkari world without the entire network responding immediately. The system had worked perfectly for decades. Until now. What do the human technical manuals say? Zephion asked, though he already knew the answer. The documentation is extensive, sir, but... Korex hesitated. The humans designed the system to grow and adapt organically. They call it evolutionary programming. Our engineers understand the basic principles, but the way the code actually develops and changes itself... He trailed off helplessly. Zephion pulled up the technical reports on his personal screen. Page after page of human programming notes filled with comments like, trust the system to find its own balance, and allow natural selection to optimize performance. To Velkari minds, trained in rigid military doctrine, it made no sense at all. The humans had tried to explain it once. Something about letting the defense network learn and grow like a living organism instead of forcing it to follow predetermined rules. The Velkari engineers had nodded politely while secretly believing their own structured approach was superior. Now, with 12 defense platforms dead and more failing every day, Zephion was beginning to understand that maybe the humans had known, something his people did not. Meanwhile, on Nethys Prime, Dr. Valdris floated in her crystalline research chamber, staring at the ruins of her latest experiment. Fragments of twisted metal and melted circuitry littered the floor around a massive crater where her dimensional resonance device had been. This was her 18th failure in 6 months. For 40 years, she had worked alongside human scientists, like Dr. Kai Young, making breakthrough after breakthrough in dimensional physics. The humans had always asked the strangest questions, things that seemed completely unrelated to their research. What if we are thinking about this backwards, Kai Young would say. Or have we considered what happens in the spaces between dimensions? Valdris had always found these questions irritating. Human minds were so primitive, so unstructured. They lacked the mathematical precision that came naturally to the Nethys. Yet somehow, those silly questions had led to their greatest discoveries. The humans would spend hours discussing theoretical scenarios that had no basis in proven science. They would sketch ridiculous diagrams and propose experiments that any properly trained Nethys scientist would reject immediately. And then, somehow, those impossible ideas would actually work. Now, working alone with only Nethys scientists, Valdris found herself stuck. Every experiment followed perfect mathematical models. Every calculation was precise and elegant, and every single test ended in catastrophic failure. She tried to remember one of Ki Young's favorite sayings. Sometimes the math is right, but reality disagrees. When that happens, trust reality. It had sounded like nonsense at the time. How could reality disagree with mathematics? But as Valdris looked at the crater where her perfectly calculated dimensional device had exploded, she was starting to understand what the human had meant. In the corporate towers of Gorvani Prime, Trade Minister Vorthak studied shipping reports with growing anxiety. The numbers looked fine on the surface, but something was wrong. Trade routes that had run smoothly for decades were experiencing delays. Small inefficiencies were multiplying across the network, creating bottlenecks and shortages throughout Gorvani space. Explain to me again why shipment delays have increased. By 30%, Vorthak growled at his logistics coordinator, a competent Gorvani named Grex. Sir, the individual delays are all within acceptable parameters, Grex replied, pulling up holographic charts. A 2-hour delay here, a routing change there, minor equipment malfunctions that require brief stops for repairs, nothing that should cause major problems. Then why are we having major problems? Grex looked uncomfortable. Before the humans left, incidents like these were somehow prevented. The human logistics team seemed to predict problems before they happened and made tiny adjustments to prevent cascade failures. Vorthak frowned. He remembered the human coordinator who had worked in this very office, a quiet man named Dong Min, who had spent his days staring at shipping schedules and making seemingly random minor changes. When questioned about his methods, Dong Min had always given vague answers about flow dynamics and predictive modeling. The Gorvani executives had assumed the human was just moving numbers around to look busy. After all, their own computer systems could calculate optimal shipping routes far more efficiently than any biological brain. Except now those computer-optimized routes were failing, and Vorthak was beginning to realize that Dong Min had been doing something far more complex than anyone had understood. "Sir," Grex continued nervously, "I have been studying the human's old reports. He mentioned something called predictive flow management, but the mathematical models he references do not exist in our databases." "What do you mean they do not exist?" "I mean the humans appear to have been using calculation methods that they never shared with us. Or perhaps—" Grex paused, then continued more quietly, "Perhaps they were not using mathematical models at all." The idea was disturbing. How could anyone manage complex logistics networks without proper mathematical optimization? Yet the evidence was undeniable. Under human coordination, the trade routes had run like clockwork. Without them, the system was slowly falling apart. Across the galaxy, similar problems were emerging. Diplomatic negotiations that had been stable for years were suddenly breaking down as species remembered old grievances. Research projects were stalling as teams struggled to replicate the collaborative methods that humans had somehow made look effortless. Economic partnerships were crumbling as the subtle coordination that humans had provided disappeared. But pride is a powerful force, especially among advanced civilizations. In the Velkari Military Command, Admiral Korath issued orders to double the engineering teams working on the defense grid. "We will solve this ourselves," he declared. "Velkari ingenuity will overcome any challenge." On Nethys Prime, the Science Council allocated additional resources to dimensional research. "We do not need primitive human methods," they announced. "Nethys precision will achieve what human guesswork could not." The Gorvani Trade Consortium hired the best logistics specialists money could buy and installed new computer systems with processing power that dwarfed anything the humans had used. "Superior technology will replace inferior biological limitations," they proclaimed. And still, the problems grew worse. Commander Zephion lost 3 more defense platforms that week. Dr. Valdris watched her 19th experiment explode in an even more spectacular fashion than the previous 18. Trade Minister Vorthak received reports of supply shortages spreading to 12 different sectors, but none of them were willing to admit what was becoming increasingly obvious. The humans had not been the weakest link in galactic civilization. They had been something far more important, something that the galaxy was only now beginning to understand it had lost. In the depths of space, human ships continued their journey toward the outer rim, carrying with them knowledge and abilities that the galaxy was learning it could not easily replace. 2 years after humanity's quiet departure, the emergency alert screamed through Velkari military headquarters at 3 in the morning. Commander Zephion jerked awake in his quarters and stumbled to his communication console, still wearing his sleeping robes. "Commander, we have lost all contact with Outer Station 7, reported Lieutenant Korax, his voice tight with panic. "Complete communication blackout. No distress signal, no automated responses, nothing." Zephion felt ice form in his stomach. Outer Station 7 housed 12,000 Velkari civilians and served as the primary defense platform for 3 colony worlds. It did not just go silent. Deploy the nearest patrol fleet for immediate investigation, Zephion ordered, his mind racing through possibilities. Enemy attack seemed unlikely since their early warning systems would have detected approaching ships. Equipment failure was more probable, but the station had multiple backup systems that should have prevented total blackout. 6 hours later, Captain Vex transmitted his report from the rescue fleet. His voice was hollow with disbelief. Commander, Outer Station 7 is intact, but completely dead. Life support failed, artificial gravity is offline, all automated systems have shut down. The population evacuated themselves using emergency protocols, but the station itself is a total loss. What caused the failure? The quantum entanglement network, sir. It appears to have suffered what our engineers are calling a catastrophic cascade collapse. The entire system tried to rewrite itself simultaneously and ended up deleting its own programming. Zephion closed his eyes. This was exactly what the human engineers had warned about 30 years ago when they first installed the system. They had insisted that the network needed what they called organic growth parameters and evolutionary safeguards. The Velkari engineers had implemented the basic structure, but had never really understood the deeper principles. How many other stations are at risk? The silence on the communication channel lasted too long. Finally, Captain Vex responded. According to our analysis, sir, all of them. The entire defense network is based on the same architecture. If we cannot solve the core programming issue, we will lose approximately one station every 3 to 4 months. After ending the transmission, Zephion sat in his dark office and stared at the star charts on his wall. Red markers indicated the locations of 47 defense stations protecting Velkari space. If Captain Vex was right, they would all be dead within 15 years. He pulled up the archived communication logs from the human engineering teams. Dozens of reports and recommendations that had been filed away and largely ignored. One phrase appeared repeatedly in human engineer Tejo's notes. The system must be allowed to evolve naturally, but evolution without guidance leads to extinction. At the time, it had sounded like typical human philosophy rather than practical engineering advice. Now, Zephion wondered if those words might have been the key to preventing this disaster. Meanwhile, in the Nethys research facility on Kepler Station, Dr. Valdris was facing a crisis of an entirely different nature. She floated in her emergency chamber, watching through reinforced crystal walls as space itself seemed to tear apart. The dimensional rift had started small, no bigger than a coin. Her latest experiment in dimensional barrier penetration had been proceeding normally when something went wrong. Instead of creating a controlled portal, her equipment had torn a hole in the fabric of space-time itself, and the hole was growing. "Status report," she transmitted to her research team, who were monitoring from a safe distance. "The rift has expanded to 7 meters in diameter," reported Dr. Nexus, her voice crackling through the communication system. "Spatial distortion is increasing. At current expansion rate, the tear will reach critical mass within 48 hours. Critical mass for what? Complete system collapse. The rift will consume the entire station, then continue expanding until it destabilizes. The star itself." Valdris felt something she had never experienced before. Genuine terror. In all her years of research, she had never encountered a problem that Nethys science could not solve. But this was beyond anything their mathematical models could predict or control. She frantically searched through her archived files, looking for any reference that might help. Deep in the research logs, she found transcripts of conversations with Dr. Ki Young, the human physicist who had worked alongside her team for 15 years. One conversation stood out. Kai Young had been discussing theoretical approaches to dimensional research when he mentioned something called resonance dampening. Valdris had dismissed it at the time as primitive human thinking that lacked mathematical sophistication. "Reality has natural shock absorbers," Ki Young had explained in his simple way. "When you push against the barriers between dimensions, You have to give space-time a way to push back gently, otherwise it pushes back violently. Valdris had argued that such concepts were unscientific. Dimensions did not have feelings or intentions. They followed mathematical laws, nothing more. Now watching a tear in reality slowly consume her research station, she wondered if Ki Young had understood something that her advanced mathematics had missed entirely. "Dr. Valdris," came an urgent transmission from the station commander. "We are beginning emergency evacuation procedures. You need to leave the research section immediately." Valdris looked at the growing rift one more time, then began her retreat. Behind her, the tear in space continued expanding, eating away at the station like some hungry cosmic predator. On Gorvani Prime, Trade Minister Vorthak was experiencing his own version of catastrophe, though it unfolded more slowly than exploding. Stations or tears in reality. His catastrophe was economic collapse, and it was spreading through Gorvani space like a plague. The trade routes that had been the foundation of Gorvani prosperity for centuries were failing. What had started as minor delays and inefficiencies 2 years ago had grown into supply chain breakdowns that were crippling entire sectors of their economy. "Sir, we have lost another major client," reported his aide, Grex, who looked like he had not slept in days. "The Zentari Consortium has terminated their shipping contracts with us. They say our delivery times have become too unreliable." Vorthak growled in frustration. "What is the status of the new optimization systems?" "Functioning perfectly, sir. Our computers can calculate the most efficient shipping routes faster than ever before." "But," Grex hesitated. "But what?" "The routes keep failing in ways the computers do not predict. A cargo ship breaks down at exactly the wrong moment, causing delays that cascade through 6 other shipments. A trade station experiences a minor computer glitch that somehow disrupts traffic through an entire star system. Small problems that should not matter are somehow destroying our entire network." Vorthak pulled up the economic projections on his wall screen. The downward trend was undeniable. Gorvani trade revenue had dropped 40% in 2 years. At this rate, their entire merchant empire would collapse within a decade. He thought about Dong Min, the quiet human who had managed logistics from this very office for 12 years. The human had never used fancy computer systems or complex mathematical models. He had simply looked at shipping schedules, made small adjustments, and somehow kept everything running smoothly. "Sir," Grex said quietly, "I have been studying the human coordinator's old methods. I think he was not just managing trade routes, I think he was managing something much more complex." "Explain." "Luck, sir. Or maybe probability. The human seemed to understand that small changes at the right moment could prevent large problems later. But the mathematical principles he used—" Grex shook his head. "I cannot find them in any database. It is as if he was using some form of calculation that we do not understand." Vorthak stared at the economic charts for a long time. Finally, he asked the question that had been haunting him for months. Where did the humans go? For the first time since humanity's departure, a major galactic leader was beginning to wonder if getting rid of them had been a mistake. The thought was deeply disturbing because it suggested that the Velkari, Nethys, and Gorvani might have been wrong about something fundamental. And if they were wrong about humanity's value, what else might they be wrong about? Across the galaxy, other species were beginning to ask similar questions as their own systems started showing signs of strain. The careful balance that had held galactic civilization together for centuries was slowly coming apart, and no one seemed to understand how to fix it. In the depths of space, human ships continued their journey toward destinations unknown, carrying with them the knowledge and abilities that the galaxy was finally beginning to realize it desperately needed. Admiral Korath stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the star charts with growing desperation. 3 years had passed since he had mocked humanity in the Galactic Council chambers. 3 years since the humans had quietly walked away. 3 years of watching his civilization slowly crumble. The search fleet around him represented the combined efforts of the Velkari, Nethys, and Gorvani governments. 50 ships, the best technology their species could produce, all dedicated to finding the humans who had disappeared into the vast emptiness of space. "Admiral, we have detected hyperspace trails," reported Commander Zephian from his position at the sensor station. "Very faint, but consistent with human ship signatures. The trail leads toward the galactic rim." Korath nodded grimly. They had been following these faint traces for months, jumping from system to system as the trail grew older and harder to detect. The humans had been clever about covering their tracks, but they had not expected anyone to look for them so desperately. "Follow the trail," Korath ordered. "We will find them." Behind him, Dr. Valdris floated in her portable crystal chamber, her energy form flickering with anxiety. The dimensional rift at Kepler Station had been contained, but barely. It had taken everything the Nethys possessed to seal the tear before it consumed the entire system. Even now, space around the station remained unstable, a permanent reminder of how close they had come to complete disaster. Trade Minister Vorthak stood beside her, his massive frame slumped with exhaustion. The Gorvani economic collapse had accelerated in recent months. Entire sectors of their economy had simply stopped functioning as supply chains failed and trading partners lost confidence in their ability to deliver goods reliably. All three leaders had swallowed their pride and admitted what they had refused to acknowledge before. They needed the humans back. The search fleet jumped through hyperspace for 6 more hours before emerging in a system that did not appear on any galactic star chart. The sensors immediately began detecting anomalous readings that made no sense. "Admiral!" Commander Zephion called out, his voice filled with disbelief. "You need to see this!" The main display screen showed a solar system unlike anything they had ever encountered. 3 planets orbited a yellow star, but these were not primitive worlds. Cities covered their surfaces, cities that glowed with technology decades ahead of anything the Council species possessed. Orbital platforms moved between the worlds, their sleek designs incorporating engineering principles that seemed almost impossible. But most shocking of all were the ships. Hundreds of vessels moved through the system, and while many were recognizably human in design, others belonged to species that the galaxy had written off as primitive or impossible to communicate with. The crystalline Jori, who supposedly lacked the intelligence for space travel, the gaseous Vril, who Council scientists had declared too alien for meaningful contact, the hive-minded Kess, who had been dismissed as a single planetary organism, with no interest in the greater galaxy. They were all here, working alongside humanity in what appeared to be a thriving civilization. "How is this possible?" Dr. Valdris whispered, her energy form pulsing with amazement. Before anyone could answer, a transmission came through on standard diplomatic frequencies. The voice was calm, professional, and unmistakably human. Unknown. "Vessels. This is Captain Nara of the Commonwealth Defense Force. You have entered protected space without authorization. Please state your intentions." Admiral Korath stepped forward, feeling suddenly small despite his imposing reptilian frame. "This is Admiral Korath of the Galactic Council. We seek an audience with human leadership. We have urgent matters to discuss." There was a pause. Then Captain Nara's voice returned, carrying just a hint of something that might have been amusement. "Admiral Korath, I remember you from the Council chambers. Please follow the escort ships to Station Haven. Landing Bay 12 has been prepared for your delegation." The escort ships that appeared were like nothing in the Council's databases. Their hulls seemed to shift and flow like living metal, and their movement through space was impossibly smooth. As the search fleet followed them toward the largest orbital station, Admiral Korath tried to process what he was seeing. This was not a refugee settlement. This was not a collection of primitive worlds where humanity had fled to hide. This was an advanced civilization that made the Galactic Council look like children playing with toys. Station Haven docked ships that were clearly from dozens of different species, many of which the Council had never encountered before. The station itself was a marvel of engineering, with sections that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Gardens visible through transparent walls contained plants from 100 different worlds, all thriving together in impossible harmony. Captain Nara met them in the main docking bay. She looked exactly as Admiral Korath remembered her from the few times their paths had crossed in council space. Average height, dark hair, unremarkable in every way except for her eyes, which seemed to see everything. "Welcome to Haven," she said with the same quiet politeness that humans had always shown. "I trust your journey was not too difficult." "Captain," Admiral Korath began, then stopped. He had prepared speeches, demands, explanations of how the Council needed humanity to return. But standing here, surrounded by technology that made his best ships look primitive, the words seemed foolish. "You want to know how we built all this?" Captain Nara said, as if reading his thoughts. "You want to understand how we accomplished in 3 years what the Council has not achieved in 3 centuries. "Yes," Dr. Valdris admitted, her energy form flickering with curiosity and shame. "Our civilizations are failing without your contributions. We need your help." Captain Nara nodded and began walking through the station corridors. The delegation followed, marveling at what they saw. Humans worked alongside Jory crystals, their movements perfectly coordinated despite having no apparent method of communication. Vril gas beings collaborated with solid matter engineers on projects that defied understanding. Kess drones moved in perfect harmony with individual members of dozens of species. "The first thing you need to understand," Captain Nara said as they walked, "is that we did not build this alone. We built it together, with species that your council dismissed as worthless or unreachable." They entered a vast research laboratory where Dr. J. Wan, the human physicist who had left Nethys research stations 3 years earlier, was working with a team that included 3 Jory crystals, 2 Vril gas clouds, and what appeared to be a living tree from the Silari homeworld. "Dr. J. Wan," Captain Nara called out, "we have visitors who are curious about your dimensional stabilization project." J. Wan looked up from a device that seemed to bend light around itself. "Ah, the Council delegation. I heard you had some trouble with dimensional rifts recently." Dr. Valdris pulsed brighter. "You know about Kepler Station?" "We monitor Council space," J-Wan said simply. "When we detected the dimensional tear, we were concerned it might expand beyond your ability to contain it. Fortunately, the rift sealed itself before requiring our intervention." "Your intervention?" Dr. Valdris could barely contain her amazement. "You could have helped us?" "Of course. Dimensional stability is not particularly difficult once you understand the underlying principles. Would you like me to explain the resonance dampening techniques that prevent such accidents?" Admiral Korath listened as J-Wan casually described solutions to problems that had nearly destroyed Nethys space. The human spoke as if these were basic principles that any competent scientist should understand. "How?" Korath finally asked. "How did you learn so much so quickly?" Captain Nara smiled, and for the first time there was genuine warmth in her expression. "We asked questions, Admiral, and more importantly, we listened to the answers. The Jory understand crystalline mathematics that make your computers look like counting stones. The Vril manipulate energy fields in ways that your physicists think are impossible. The Kess process information through biological networks that dwarf your greatest artificial intelligences." She gestured around the laboratory, where impossible collaborations were producing miraculous results. "For centuries, your council assumed that technological advancement meant becoming more like you. We learned that real advancement comes from becoming more than any single species could be alone." Admiral Korath felt something he had never experienced before. genuine humility. "We made a mistake," he said quietly. "When we drove you away, we were wrong." "Yes," Captain Nara agreed simply. "You were." The delegation spent 3 days touring the human settlements, seeing wonders that challenged everything they thought they knew about science, technology, and civilization itself. And slowly, they began to understand just how badly they had misjudged humanity's place in the galaxy. The Great Council Chamber on Haven Station was nothing like the massive halls of the Galactic Council. It was smaller, warmer, with circular seating arrangements that put no species above another. Sunlight streamed through crystal walls, and living plants from dozens of worlds created a garden atmosphere that felt more like a park than a government building. President Yeonji sat at a simple wooden table, watching as representatives from across the galaxy filed into the chamber. Admiral Korath led the Velkari delegation, his proud, golden scales now dulled with desperation. Dr. Valdris floated beside the Nethys group, her energy form flickering with anxiety. Trade Minister Vorthak commanded the Gorvani representatives, his massive frame slumped with the weight of economic collapse, but they were not alone. Over the past 6 months, word had spread throughout Council space that the humans had been found. Dozens of other species had sent their own desperate delegations, each carrying tales of systems failing, economies crashing, and problems that seemed impossible to solve without human help. Yunji had listened to them all with the same patient attention that humanity had always shown. Now, as the chamber filled with the galaxy's most powerful leaders, she prepared to give them her answer. "You honor us with your presence," Yunji said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's perfect acoustics. "We understand that many of your civilizations are facing difficulties, and you believe humanity can provide solutions." Admiral Korath leaned forward eagerly. "President Yunji, the Velkari Empire offers full military protection to any human settlements. Our fleets will guard your worlds, and we will share our most advanced weapons technology." Dr. Valdris pulsed brighter. "The Nethys Collective proposes unlimited access to our research facilities. Human scientists will have complete freedom to pursue any projects they choose, with unlimited funding and resources." Trade Minister Vorthak stood and spread his massive arms. "The Gorvani Consortium offers exclusive trading partnerships worth trillions of galactic credits. Your people will have access to markets throughout known space and preferential treatment on all commercial ventures." Other delegates began shouting their own offers. The Zentari promised rare mineral rights. The Alteri offered advanced manufacturing facilities. The Corvin pledged entire star systems for human colonization. Yunji waited for the chaos to die down, then spoke again. "These are generous offers, but before we discuss the future, perhaps we should examine the past." She gestured, and the chamber's walls came alive with holographic displays showing scenes from the old Galactic Council. Admiral Korath giving his speech about inferior species. Dr. Valdris dismissing human research methods as primitive. Trade Minister Vorthak laughing about humans who barely understand basic economics. "For 300 years, Yunji continued, humanity participated in galactic civilization. We offered our ideas, our innovations, our perspectives, and for 300 years, we were told that we were not good enough, smart enough, or advanced enough to matter." The chamber fell silent. Many of the delegates shifted uncomfortably as they recognized their own words and actions in the historical records. Dr. Sun Ho, who had once worked alongside Dr. Valdris on dimensional research, stood from his seat among the human delegation. "I spent 15 years trying to explain resonance theory to Nethys scientists. Every breakthrough we achieved together was credited to Nethys precision and mathematical excellence. My contributions were footnotes, if they were mentioned at all. Engineer Wu Jin, who had solved countless impossible problems for Velkari, construction projects, spoke next. I designed half the defense platforms that are now failing throughout Velkari space. But when Admiral Korath presented those systems to the Council, he called them pure Velkari engineering genius. The human involvement was an embarrassment to be hidden. Captain Nara rose from her position beside President Yunji. You are not here because you suddenly discovered our worth. You are here because your civilizations are collapsing, and you need us to fix the problems you created by ignoring our warnings. Admiral Korath's voice cracked with desperation. We were wrong. We admit it, but surely that matters now. Surely you can forgive our mistakes and help us rebuild. Forgive? President Yunji asked quietly. Admiral, we forgave you long ago. Anger is a poison that hurts the one who carries it more than the one who caused it. We harbor no grudges against any of your species. A murmur of relief rippled through the chamber, but Yunji held up her hand. However, forgiveness does not mean we are willing to repeat the same mistakes. You are asking us to return to a system that spent centuries telling us we did not matter. To fix problems that arose because you believed our contributions were worthless. To abandon the new civilization we have built with partners who value our perspectives. She gestured toward the viewing ports, where the bustling activity of Haven Station continued. Humans worked alongside Jory crystals, Vril gas beings, Kess drones, and dozens of other species that the Council had dismissed as primitive or irrelevant. Look, around you, President Yunji said. In 3 years, we have accomplished more than the Council achieved in 3 centuries. We have solved problems that your greatest minds called impossible. We have built technologies that make your most advanced systems look primitive, and we did it by embracing the one principle your civilization rejected, that wisdom can come from anywhere, and true strength lies in cooperation, not domination. Dr. Sunho stepped forward again. Every species in this chamber has something unique to contribute. The Jory understand mathematical relationships that transcend physical dimensions. The Vril manipulate energy in ways that rewrite physics textbooks. The Kess process information through biological networks that make artificial intelligence seem crude. But your Council was so focused on measuring advancement by your own standards that you missed the incredible diversity of intelligence surrounding you. We learned differently, added Engineer Wu Jin. We learned to ask questions instead of assuming we had all the answers. We learned to listen instead of lecturing. We learned that the species you called primitive were often more advanced than any of us in ways we had never considered. Trade Minister Vorthak's voice was barely above a whisper. What would it take? What would we need to do to earn your help? President Yunji looked around the chamber at the desperate faces of beings who had once considered themselves the masters of the galaxy. Her expression was sad but resolute. Nothing, she said simply. There is nothing you can do, because what we have built here cannot coexist with the system you represent. You are asking us to abandon a civilization based on cooperation and mutual respect to return to one based on hierarchy and domination. You want us to leave partners who value our contributions to rejoin organizations that see us as inferior. She stood, and her voice carried a finality that echoed through the silent chamber. The galaxy made its choice when it decided we were expendable. You drove away not just humanity, but the very principles that make civilization strong. Now you must live with the consequences of that choice. Admiral Korath rose desperately. But our civilizations are dying. Without your help, billions will suffer. Yes, President Yunji acknowledged sadly. They will, and that suffering is the direct result of 3 centuries of pride, arrogance, and willful blindness to the value of others. We cannot fix that by returning to the same system that created it. Captain Nara stepped forward. However, we are not completely heartless. Any individual who wishes to join our Commonwealth is welcome, provided they embrace our principles of cooperation and Mutual respect. Any species willing to abandon the old hierarchical model and work as true equals may apply for membership. But we will not return to the Council, and we will not prop up a system that treats some beings as inherently superior to others. As the galactic delegates filed out of the chamber, their faces showed the full weight of understanding. They had not just lost humanity's help, they had lost their last chance to avoid the consequences of their own choices. In the months that followed, some species took Captain Nara's offer seriously. Smaller civilizations, tired of being dismissed by the major powers, began making contact with the Commonwealth. A few individuals from Council species abandoned their positions to join humanity's new civilization, but the great powers of the galaxy, their pride still intact despite their desperation, chose to continue struggling alone. They preferred collapse to admitting they had been fundamentally wrong about the nature of true civilization, and in the outer rim of the galaxy, humanity and their partners continued building something better than what they had left behind, proving every day that the quiet strength of cooperation would always triumph over the loud boasts of domination.